In the 5th chapter of Matthew, during the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus calls his disciples to a radical way of life, where one must be perfect, just as your heavenly Father is perfect. This high bar of morality includes the prescription that Christians should avoid every evil deed whatsoever, no matter how small. No sin, whether mortal or venial, can ever intentionally be committed. But if this is the case, how should we understand something like the principle of double effect, which has a long tradition of acceptance in Christian ethics, such as in the writing of Thomas Aquinas? Before explaining what the principle of double effect is, let's clearly articulate what it's not. The principle of double effect stands in opposition to consequentialist or utilitarian models of ethics, where the result of a particular action determines its morality, even if the thing you're actually doing would normally be thought of as evil. Murdering an innocent, their death allowed others to live. Lying to save someone's life, well, you did it for the right reasons. In the Catholic faith, however, our model of ethics is not reliant on results alone. Instead, the classical categories for an action to be unequivocally good are the act itself, the intention or goal of that action, and the circumstances surrounding the action. This system is better geared towards the reality of how humans make choices, because while a person can do the right thing for the right reasons, we often do the wrong things for wrong or selfish reasons that inhibit the full expression of the good we ought to do. This brings us to the principle of double effect. The principle of double effect is named because it refers to a good action with two consequences, one good and one evil. It has four main conditions. Firstly, the object, intention, and circumstance must be good. Secondly, the bad effects can be tolerated, but not directly willed. Thirdly, the good effects must be caused directly, either in the same measure or more so than the bad effects. Fourthly, the good effects must proportionally outweigh the bad. A good example of the principle of double effect would be something like voting. In most cases, unless one lives in a majority Catholic nation, the candidates it is possible to elect are often lacking in a full ethical sense of social justice, respect for human life, sexual ethics, or other absolutely essential points of Catholic doctrine. Yet the Catechism expresses a positive duty to vote, meaning that a choice can seem to come down to the lesser of two evils. But under the principle of double effect, it would be permitted to exercise the good action of voting, so that one can support a candidate who supports a genuine good, so long as that good is what is willed and not a more minor evil. Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger expressed it this way in 2004, noting, "A Catholic would be guilty of formal cooperation in evil, and so unworthy to present himself for Holy Communion, if he were to deliberately vote for a candidate precisely because of that candidate's permissive stand on abortion and/or euthanasia. When a Catholic does not share a candidate's stand in favor of abortion and/or euthanasia, but votes for that candidate for other reasons, it is considered remote material cooperation, which can be permitted in the presence of proportionate reasons. But again, we must be very careful when weighing what constitutes a proportionate reason, and be wary of simple partisanism when dealing with the political sphere." Another good example of double effect is the classic example in medical ethics of the case of a pregnant woman with a fatal ailment, such as a cancerous uterus. If she does nothing, she will die, but if she has a procedure to save her life, her unborn son or daughter will die. In such a case, it would be permitted to have a life-saving procedure done to remove the endangering tissue, even if it results in the unintentional death of her child. This example does not violate the three principles outlined before: act, intention, and circumstance. The procedure is good, the intent is good, and the circumstances are good, morally speaking. However, it should be added that though a pregnant woman would be permitted to have a life-saving operation in this scenario, she is certainly not obliged to. And there is even something noble and laudable about choosing the life of her child instead, as was the case with saint and medical practitioner Gianna Molla, who is remembered for sacrificing her own life for her baby by choosing a less invasive procedure that was insufficient to save her life. As Pope Paul VI articulated the principle of double effect in Humanae Vitae, though it is true that sometimes it is lawful to tolerate a lesser moral evil in order to avoid a greater evil or in order to promote a greater good, it is never lawful, even for the gravest reasons, to do evil that good may come of it. Understood in this way, the principle of double effect remains very different from a consequentialist ethic, not only because the principle of double effect is more restrictive in its application, but also because it can never be applied to what the Church calls an intrinsic evil, an action where the act itself can never be made good, no matter the circumstance. Pope St. John Paul II contrasts intrinsic evils with results-based models of ethics in Veritatis Splendor, in which he notes, Reason attests that there are objects of the human act which are by their nature incapable of being ordered to God, because they radically contradict the good of the person made in his image. These are the acts which, in the Church's moral tradition, have been termed intrinsically evil. They are such always and per se, in other words, on account of their very object, and quite apart from the ulterior intentions of the one acting and the circumstances. An example of an intrinsic evil is something like suicide or euthanasia. No matter how difficult life is always a gift from God, and to reject that gift of life is to blaspheme God, by presuming to ordain for ourselves the time and place when we will pass from this life to the next. And therefore, suicide in its very object is an affront to God. We could make a similar point with something like adultery or lying. In both these cases, there is no good form of these sins, because the object itself is an aberration of good, before even considering whether we intend something good to come out of our evil deed. You might ask, how can God ask so much of us? But our question is not different from the question of the apostles who asked Jesus, "Who then can be saved?" Jesus replied, "For human beings this is impossible, but for God all things are possible." Therefore let us strive for the perfection that Jesus calls us to in the Sermon on the Mount, not under our own power, but through the grace offered to us by Christ. Hi, I hope you enjoyed learning about the principle of double effect. If you found this video informative and you want to help me make more like it, please consider supporting me at catechesisvids.com. Thanks for watching.